Live stream started.
Welcome everybody. Welcome to the Resources Overview Scrutiny Committee on the 28th of July at 2 o'clock, just over. We have had apologies from Councillor Kenwood and Councillor Jenkins. Item 3, appointment committee chair and deputy chair. I'll just want this to know the resolution of the City Council appointing the committee chairs and members to serve on the committee for the period ending with the annual meeting of the City Council 2023 as follows. We've got myself, Councillor Ahmed as chair, Bushra B, Councillor Bushra B, Councillor Rashad Mahmood. We have Councillor Henry McQuillan, who's not here, and Councillor Sybil Spence from the Labour Group. So that's 5 of us. Conservative Group is Councillor Marion Jenkins and Ken Wood, and the Liberal Democrat Group, Councillor Paul Tilsley. Welcome and thank you. Shall we just have a quick ice-breaking session for the rest? I will start with yourself.
Mohammed Sajid, Head of Financial Strategy, Council for Treasury Fund Accounts.
Sarah Pitt, Director of Finance, Deputy Section 151.
Jessica.
Fiona Bottrell, Senior Overview Scrutiny Manager.
Akhtar Ahmed, Chair.
Paul Tilsley, Liberal Democrat, long time pain in the neck.
Bushra B. Warden.
Rashad Mahmood, Sparkle. Thank you for that. Can I just advise that this meeting will be webcast to live or subsequent broadcast by the Council's YouTube website, and that members of the press or public may record and take photographs except where there are confidential or exempt items. For the purpose of having a deputy chair, we had Councillor Bushra B. I can formally propose Councillor B. Would anybody like to second?
Great.
Seconded by Councillor Paul Tilsley. And a member.
Formally agreed by.
Is that agreed by the committee?
James casting vote.
Agreed. Any members are reminded that they must declare all relevant pecuniary and non-pecuniary interests arising from any business to be discussed at this meeting. If the disclosure of pecuniary interest is declared, a member must not speak or take part in this agenda item. Any declarations will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. Item 5, resources only scrutiny committee terms of reference. In terms of reference to fulfill the functions of an overview scrutiny committee as they relate to any policies, services and activities concerning finance, including strategic finance, budget setting and financial monitoring, revenues and benefits, treasury management, council, land use and property assets, human resources and contracting, commissioning and commercialization.
Chris, just before we go to the next item, I'm just conscious that the microphone is quite a long way down the room, and I've just seen a message that it's quite difficult to hear for people online. So I just would ask people to make sure, if possible, people are speaking enough that they can hear on the microphone. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Item 6 are the action notes. Can I bring in our seasoned veteran Paul Tilsley, because we were on this committee previously?
I couldn't say anything that jumped out that wasn't accurate, and obviously we'll be covering much of the ground that we've already covered in the minutes, should there be any tidying up.
Yes. Thank you for that, Councillor Tilsley.
Last inspector.
Item 7, provisional financial outturn report. Can I bring Sarah on
Thank
this.
you.
Over to you, Sarah.
We've got some slides. I think.
Yes. Yeah.
Just while we bring the slides up, just to say that there is a very large report that's also attached with your deck today. What I was intending to do is to give you a high-level summary of that. I've got about 7 or 8 slides just to take you through, just to help you read that deck. I don't mind if you want to interrupt as I go, or if you want to wait to the end to do questions, and then we can dive into the report if that helps as well.
So this is the act.
This is the act. Perfect, thank you. Okay. If you just want to move on the slide, please. Thank you. So we brought a report to the Cabinet on the 28th of June, summarising both the revenue actually and the capital position to Cabinet for the year of 21-22. These were draft figures and they remain draft figures until our external audit occurs, which will take place later this year. We have continued to face structural challenges throughout 21-22, really flowing over from COVID, Brexit, things that happened in Ukraine. So you've been hearing quite a lot from us through conversations at Cabinet, or indeed at previous scrutinies as well. So we continue to face quite a lot of challenge. We did, however, achieve a revenue underspend of 17.8 million. That was after having had an overspend halfway through the year of 10.2 million. So as we saw that occurring, we put in place spending controls. So we have those introduced in November. We have panels in place around recruitment, procurement and contract management, and facilities management. So they're the 3 targeted areas, and all of that helped to bring the position down and indeed actually to turn it into an underspend. So that's a pretty impressive position to get to, given all of those financial challenges as well, and not just on this authority, the authorities of the country facing that. That money we proposed to Cabinet to put into the Financial Resilience Reserve, which they agreed to. That strengthens the Council's financial position. The Resilience Reserve, we assessed the risks of the Council financially, and we set money aside. I'm not sure many of the authorities actually do a Financial Resilience Reserve, so I think that's a good thing that we have one. And so that has added to that position and helps as we come into this financial year. Just moving on slides. In-year achievements, so again, just to get a bit of context to this, you'll remember that CIPFA awarded the Council a 3-star financial management rating right at the beginning of 21-22, I think it was about May time. That was a significant improvement from the 1-star report that we had in 2019. And testament actually to a lot of hard work that's gone on here in the authority. And financial management, not just something that finance do, but actually is a wide range of things right across the whole organisation. So everybody playing a part in that. So that was a really good thing to achieve. That improvement is demonstrated throughout the report actually, because we delivered our planned savings, so 91% of the planned savings, including a corporate saving of 20 million in that, which has been the first time in many years since we've necessarily achieved all of the savings that we set out to do. We've maintained really healthy reserve balances, we have reduced borrowing levels, and as I mentioned before, we put in place measures to manage our costs down. So they are all really great things that demonstrate solid financial management. So that's good that you can see that playing out. And commencing into this financial year, we enter the year with a balanced budget, so there's no impact no adverse impact on our reserves, having had a positive outcome. So had that been an overspend, that would have not been a great place to come into this year, but that's been a good position to be in, and obviously sets us up to be even more financially resilient, particularly as we approach managing our medium-term financial plan, of which we have a gap of 33 million for 23-24 onwards. So you may remember our medium-term financial plan report went to City Council in February. It gets signed off there, and so that is a published position with that gap, and we're currently working on resolving that as we speak. If you just move on. Areas of concern and risk. So we're continuing to see some impact of the pandemic on demands for our services, so housing, social care, the reduced income through parking and leisure. So obviously as people are, I guess there's a new norm there in terms of how work environments are now operating, and more people working hybrid or home. And so that's had an impact on how people go about their daily lives now, really. So we'll start to think about what that means for things like parking and leisure and like. The national economy, and so I probably almost don't need to really go into this because I think we see it playing out every day in the press really, but we know we've got inflation rises, we know we've got rising food and energy costs, the impact of Brexit, the impact of Ukraine, and I could go on really on that. So there's quite a lot of areas of concern and risk to us as an authority. A couple of areas where we agreed to set some money aside as part of the outcome report. So local welfare provision, we have set £1 million into that, so extra money going into the from the council tax hardship reserve into that local welfare provision. That's funding extra staffing to deal with the rising numbers of claims and also to supplement the provision itself. And then we also receive a household support grant. So there's a 12.8 million grant that we're receiving actually in this financial year. We have added to that £1.3 million. So that was pledged by the leader in May. And so that will come out from the financial resilience reserve. So part of that investment will go towards that, which essentially adds a 10% to that grant. So that's a good thing. I'm just going to hand over to Mohammed just for this particular slide on capital and treasury.
Thank you. The capital programme planned expenditure of £764 million, and we spent £528 million. So there was a slippage of £250 million. But that's kind of typical as well of many years where capital programmes do slip for many reasons. One, because when you set the programme, it's contingent on planning permission in certain cases or availability of contractors or the procurement process happening. So the budget is set well in advance of when they will start. So certain things obviously get delayed onto projects are because of that. We've also we're coming out of the impact of the pandemic, so there were still some restrictions back in April 21, so which was feeding through the economy, and there have been shortages in materials and in labour, which has had an impact on us as well. So there was a slippage. There was an overspend of 26.6 million. That was mainly on the HRA repairs and maintenance programme. What we do with capital is that when we set the capital budget for the year, we tend not to change it, even though we have new resources against it. So the HRA identified extra needs. Some of those were coming out of the fire improvement works they were doing as a result of Grenfell, but sometimes when they go into a particular block of flats and start to do some work, then it's economic to do further works that may come out of that. They may be later in the programme, maybe 2 years down, but because they're on site and it's easier to do those in one go, so they do those. And those extra works were funded from the HRA itself, so there was no loss of resources. So they were able to manage that. But for transparency, we then show that as an overspend, which is then fully funded through that. And then Treasury Management, this is where the council does have the largest debt in the country, but that is because we are the largest council in the country, and using debt to fund capital works is an acceptable way of doing things and a proven way of doing things. Where, for example, if you are building a school, then why should that be funded from 1 year's money? It should be funded from 30 or 40 years' money whilst the school is useful. So every unit pays for that, for the use of the asset. So that's why we borrow And we started the year with a net debt of 3.16 billion, and we brought that down to 2.96 billion. And that is because reduced borrowing in the capital programme and us repaying debt off. So that's been a positive from our point of view, and especially now coming into the issue of increased interest rates. So having a lower debt book should stand us in good stead.
Okay. Other areas of spend and income. So our dedicated schools grant. So we have specific grant around schools. There was a balanced position at outturn. That's after we've appropriated reserves. So we've essentially moved some money over to reserves, 13 million. And we've also set aside 5 million as a deficit repayment plan for the high needs block. That doesn't leave the authority, that's just money that gets put back into the high needs block. So we're just assigning there. And then a wider underspend of 8 million. Housing revenue account underspend of 4 million. And that's going into the housing revenue account ring fence reserve, increasing that from 11 million to 15 million. And then the collection fund, so that's our council tax and business rates. Again, as Mohammed was mentioning, in terms of heavily impacting on COVID, again, our collection rates equally impacted. So at outturn, the council share of collection fund is a deficit of 3 million. That does compare to a deficit of 36 million at Q3. So there is an improvement, even though we're in a deficit, which should provide more resources to the City Council when setting the budget for 23-24 as well. I've just got a summary slide then, just kind of, so in summary, I suppose, very strong financial management here at Birmingham. That doesn't mean we're not financially challenged. We are. You know, we've talked about those risks, but we're in a good place administratively when it comes to financial management. Very much recognised by CIFA. We delivered our planned savings. We have increased reserves from 1.062 million, which is a billion pounds and rising, to 1.071 million at the end of the year, considered robust for such a this size. So I think that's on your reserves and how are we actually doing pretty well. Levels of borrowing have reduced as planned, and what I would say is very collective ownership narrative financial management by corporate leadership team, which is good. So I think we're in it together in the collective accountability and responsibility for that, and I think we can see that demonstrated.
Thank you for that, Sarah. I'll just put it to the members. Councillor Tilden.
Thank you, Chairman. Congratulations. First of all, because I think we've been living along for a long time. And it's good to see the team of Rebecca, Sarah and Mohammed have actually gone on with this now. And so congratulations to you. The one criticism I would have is I used to start the start chamber at the end of the first quarter. And it was, if you were reporting, this is where I plugged the chair in. You didn't start effectively the start chamber until November, and you're halfway through the year. So I would urge you to bring it forward a bit, because there are some savings that you haven't identified in the budget that you need to nail down. And you know, it's the point I always make. If you've got a saving of £1 million at the beginning of the year and you don't make it, effectively at half year you've got to save £2 million. And it just doubles up all the time. So it's the only criticism I would have as far as the revenue is concerned. What I am concerned about is the capital program, because we started off with a budget of £764 million, and we were short of 262 on spend, and we're carrying that forward into the next year. Leave aside the Commonwealth Games for a moment, and I'm not going to rain on the parade today. That's what politics does for you 50 years. You mentioned, Mohammed, that there were specific issues as far as planning consent was concerned in the slippage. are there any specific programs, initiatives, items in the capital program that we haven't achieved? I say that because if you can identify them, we can all collectively help. Coming from the point of view that we've got HS2, which is sucking all the resources out of the system effectively still. We've got inflation running around 9-10%, and that inevitably is going to feed through into prices that we've got for any capital projects. We know that steel is going through the roof because of what's happening in China, the main supplier. So I'd be grateful if you can help out on that. Hardship funding, yes. I think it would be helpful if we actually went through all the risks that we can identify, because if we go back 3 years, we would not have put COVID down or a pandemic on our risk register. But I think we really need to look at that and tie that down. And as a non-exec at the airport, you know, it's creating more problems for us there. And then Treasury Management. It's good to see that we got it down from a debt of 3.16 billion down to 2.96. I think it would be helpful if there was a workshop for all members to look at Treasury Management and how we do it as a city, because it is quite complicated. We've got a variety of funding streams. It's not all Public Works Loan Board, but I think it would help for new members to get their head around it. And, you know, our debt is bigger than some African nations, let's face facts. So getting your head around the totality, I think would be helpful. And I'll leave it there as far as my comments and remarks are concerned.
On the Treasury Management training, we have got that program.
Yeah.
Because we did one in July 2020, and we then deferred the next round.
Well, yeah, we didn't. Yeah.
Yeah, so now that the new members are here,
Okay.
we're arranging that. And I'm looking to bring an external person in to do that, so you can get an independent view and wisdom about what good treasury management looks like, and then compare that to what we're doing.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, paying off as much as we can at the moment with the interest rates about to take off. Particularly when the Fed stuck it up by 0.75 yesterday. It's just a harbinger of what is going to happen to us. Because if they sneeze, we get a severe cough, don't we?
I think, yeah, there is. And I think members do know that we're redeeming older debt, which was at much higher than today's.
Well, you know, I remember PWL in housing, you know, it was over 60 years and we were paying 8-9%,
yeah.
1 or 2 tens as well.
Yeah, we've got some of those hopefully being redeemed.
So, you know, the sooner we can get those off the books,
yeah,
whilst interest rates have been like the better.
We've just undertaken an exercise last few weeks to look at all of our debt and see whether that can be redeemed. Obviously, the ones with PWB can't be redeemed because of the penalties involved with the same place. But there are a few bondholders that we are now contacting who may for a premium redeem that debt, so we're just trying to work the numbers out. That's still favourable to us.
This is why I think it's helpful to have an in-depth workshop, because you can start to appreciate that whilst we can, on the face of it, redeem debt, there's always a penalty, upfront penalty, in doing so, particularly with external. It's not so bad with PWB, but with external ones, it can be prohibitive.
I mean, the question of the external lender is they're getting 8% from us or 9%. Well, they redeem that. Because what they do with the cash flow, it's just that.
You put the money up front.
Exactly. So,
yeah.
In terms of the capital programme, the planning column was a general one, that there's because there's based on a programme of works, and there's kind of milestones to reach and some of those slip. But one of the particular ones was on the Perival waste disposal stuff, where I think we had to go back and change some of the technical stuff. But all of those issues are reported to Capital Board on a monthly basis, and then through to Cabinet and scrutiny. So any issues of that are highlighted so that we can bring in any involvement to support on that. In terms of this year's particular programme, the key kind of areas where we had making up the most of that £200 million was we had 43 million on the Peribar residential scheme, where a few because
Repeat the number.
the Peribar residential scheme
It's
43 million, 43.5 million slippage, and that was just delays in the works and payments. Some of the payments we haven't made to with the bus depot contractual some of that delays in that, but slow. And then on the property strategy, we slipped by 47 million. So we had a budget of 60 million pounds where we were looking to buy properties that serve the council's interest in terms of they would promote. So budget's been set aside. That's not a target, it's a facility that's available. So if properties do come about, then they will do so. This year before, because of COVID, there wasn't much in the market. This year, we were hoping to spend most of that and get some of those deals over the line by 31st of March, but as you know, Sutton, the retail bar that we purchased in Sutton, that did happen in May, and then nine Snow Hills that we were hoping to get done by the end of March, but that's happening this year. So those are just timing differences into the slippage of those 47 million, that's the thing. And then on the Birmingham Breeds or the clean air zone, we've had a slippage of £19 million, and that's mainly in the mitigation budget, where the council has set aside money for truck drivers, for taxi drivers, to be able to claim some grants and mitigations to do that. Now they need to make a claim for us to do that. So because the delay in the start of the clean air zone being delayed to partway through the year, some of those haven't yet come through, and even if they do come through, we need people to, for example, if they're buying a new taxi, they need to submit a receipt to us that they bought the taxi. We'll then make those payments for that. Just natural delays in the process, but that hopefully should get picked up to spend next year.
I think it's just worth saying as well, comments about rising cost of steel, and we are very aware of the risks of the capital programme of rising cost. And I think we are keeping an eye on
Exactly, we discussed this capital
profiling. Does it mean we might need to prioritise things? So that is being very much thought about, as well as those.
We are clear that the budget for capital is fixed.
Yeah.
It's not like revenue, it's ongoing resource, you can do projections. It's a fixed amount, so certain projects have gone back and just try to re-engineer or remodel it and try and do things in a different way. Okay.
I've seen a variety of capital projects during my little life hit the buffers, particularly because of inflation, particularly on infrastructure work, steel, etc. And the NEC springs to mind. We've had real problems with some of the phases through inflationary costs of steel work, and we've been working on fixed prices as well.
All the major capital programs are monitored on a monthly basis through a highlight report to the council board, but they are discussed, and you can imagine each project is different, and yeah, risks and areas that manage to do that.
Okay.
And then just to pick up on wider training, actually, because I think it's important for members to know, yes, we're doing treasury training. We did budget training last year, we'll do the same again, because I think that's really important as we come into setting a budget, that all members understand what that means, how we do finances generally in local government. So we'll definitely be looking at that again. And we'll have a look and see what else we probably need to do throughout the year, actually, because I think it's useful for
Yeah.
I think Council Tilton was a workshop.
Yeah, well, we've got the treasury one, but I think there's maybe one or two others that we can also do training on. So we did the budget one, and I do intend to run that.
Okay. When we're doing that, Sarah, I think it would be helpful, because it was always an eye-opener to me. When I used to do field work, and you go to various parts of the country, and you see how different authorities are dependent upon government income and their own income. And they're always stuck in my mind. I mean, 70% of our income, council tax, comes from properties that are A to C. When I did Oldham, it was 70% came from Band A. And then when you go down south, you actually find that they're not dependent upon government grants at all, because they're raising all the money through council tax. So I think that kind of all-embracing guide to local government income would be very, very helpful, because it helps to get the issue in people's minds. And it wasn't until I started to go outside the boundaries, as it were, that you appreciate how what the impact of government grants are on
I think that's a key point that we sort of picked up over the years, that because the council tax is just one part of the bigger income thing. By increasing your budget, say by 1%, because council tax is a very, like, you have to increase the council tax by 10%.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the exact breakdown that we get, 20% council tax, business, other income, and it's set aside. 1% on loss on that can have rented income. And you said yourself, Sarah, in presentation, that we're seeing the loss of car parking income now. Well, that has to be made up. Where do we make it up? Because a lot of the other income is fixed.
Yeah. The training that we did cover some of that, some of the stuff that we're talking about. I think the one thing for me, I don't know whether we left it a bit later in the year, we didn't get any taking on. So we might need to think about how we do it. So if Mohammed's running a workshop, maybe the workshop way of doing it might be an option for people as well. We did record the session, so but we'll look at maybe we'll break it down a little bit and think about how we do it. But it did cover those things. I think they're important things to understand. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Can I just check the training sessions that you've run before? Was that for all members or
Yes,
just members of this committee?
it was all members. Yes. Yeah, because all members are signing off the budget.
Yes.
So yes, it was open.
That's what we can do is support members or encourage members of this committee particularly.
Yes.
To
Yes,
take on
absolutely.
as well.
Absolutely.
This committee will be committee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can do that.
Thank you. Can I just put it to the rest of the members, any comments or questions? No? Moving on swiftly to item 8, financial monitoring 2022 to 23 quarter 1. To consider the quarter 1 financial monitoring report. Consider that cabinet on the 26th of July 2022. Sarah, can I bring you in on that?
Yeah. Again, it's just bringing the slide deck up again. So I've got a high level slide deck for you, and the large report is in your pack. But again, this is the headlines for you. Just want to move on. Thank you. I'll probably whiz through this a little bit because I've just been talking about these things. So the report talks about the financial challenges in the authority at a national level as well as a local level. So obviously we're talking about post-pandemic recovery, Brexit, Ukraine, price inflation. The government announced that councils in England will receive a 2-year funding settlement. Now that was when Mr. Gove was in. I don't know whether that's still in train or not at the moment, so we're hopeful that that's going to happen, but we haven't had any detail on that. But if that's the case, it does enable a much greater degree of confidence in planning, certainly if we get to a funding settlement. We've seen many councils failing through poor governance and decision making, weak procurement, low levels of reserve and over borrowing. Everything I've taken you through on the previous deck, what you'll see in this slide deck, actually from Birmingham's position, we're in a pretty strong position, and our external auditor supports that as well from a financial resilience aspect as well. And CIPA's resilience indicators. So they look at things like borrowing, they look at levels of reserves, they look at delivery of savings and how well you're doing that. And they look to see whether you have a strong budget process. So there are indicators to them of organisations that might be on the cusp of failing. On all of those counts, I think we're pretty strong. So that's a good place to be in. If you just want to move on. And this is just why I think strong, because one, sit for 3-star organisation, the positive external audit, as I mentioned, growing national reputation around that as well, and we're currently working on our 4-star financial management rating as well. So that's all very positive. Strong reserves and balances, borrowing reducing. Focus on value for money. This is a real big thing for us now, and I think this is a strength in organisations that have good financial management, because value for money is absolutely critical in everything we do. And so making sure we've got that challenge in our decision making is absolutely key. our external auditors look at that, but we're also introducing funding framework to the organisation as well, so we can test that every time people are thinking about spending money, they are doing it with that value for money thoughts about it. And we're also transforming to deliver best-in-class services as well. So we're not sitting back on our laurels and just assuming things will remain as they are. In order to use our money well, we need to think about how we transform the services that we deliver for our citizens. The spend controls that I talked about that we introduced last November remain in place actually, so those panels are still operative. What I will say is we have the ability to throttle them if we need to. So to Councillor Tilsley's point, actually we can do that at any point if we're thinking that we need to, you know, so we're not sure we've got mitigations in place and we're not sure our savings are quite on track, we can, if we want to, say, right, we'll throttle a little bit, and that might be to just curb back on some spending. So we have that option to us, which is good that we've got those panels in place. We have a rolling budget approach in place. So our medium-term financial plan doesn't just happen in February and we forget about it. We continue to review the risks. In the back of that report, there are a fair few pages which demonstrate all the risks. I think what we'll probably do is bring those either into the Q2 report or certainly our next medium-term financial plan report, in-year report is due, I think, October, November time, and that will have those risks in there again. They've all been refreshed, so we are constantly looking at that. Heightened options around a pandemic, I think we'll definitely be putting in there, Councillor Tilsley, so we'll probably have a view in terms of what that might mean, and I think given where we are in terms of monthly costs and stuff as well, so you know it's almost like never ending, isn't it? And then just to say that again, we are not without financial challenge. So as much as I am saying we are financially well managed, that doesn't mean we don't have those challenges. We know we have a gap that we need to work on next year. We know we have a set of financial risks that we are very cognizant of. For me, it's how we manage that, but not that we're not open. So if we just move on. So the Q1 report itself, and what I just want to say on this, we've had a look at how we're doing the quarter reports and where our focus is, and we're very much wanting to get more of an insight-driven approach to our reporting. So really starting to think about the things that are emerging, the things that give us concerns, the areas that we should be mitigating, things like how we're doing with our savings, and starting to bring in some of that wider insight in terms of what's happening nationally, what's happening locally. So using more of our data and insight intelligence that we have to drive those financial monitoring reports as well. So the Q1 report was the first in the annual cycle of reports. So we come every quarter to Cabinet with one of those reports. There isn't a Q4, instead we have the outturn report, so that's the final report in terms of monitoring. And we also come to scrutiny in between quarters, so every month there is a report that gives us a financial position. Due to the need just to concentrate resources on Oracle implementation, the Q1 was quite a high level report, but actually in my view, it's focused very much on the things that really matter. And I think that's, as I say, that's where our focus will be going forward. There have been a number of risks identified within that report. The split of those are things that we already knew about in the financial plan 22-23, and so they're all listed in the rear of that report, as well as a few new risks that we've also identified.
I think just stop you there, Sarah. Which new risks have you highlighted?
Just, have you got the report in front of you? If I carry on, can I come back to that question? Thank you. I'm just getting Harry to just bring the report up for me. My thought should have it next to it. We've also identified opportunities, and a few opportunities, and again, they're in the report. So I'll just pick on what they are when I get to that page. We are forecasting at the moment a balanced budget by the end of the year. That assumes all of the risks are mitigated. So rather than the yo-yoing that we did last year, where we showed an overspend and then we went away and talked about mitigations, the plan this year is we are utterly focused on balancing. That is where we are heading. we will be ensuring that we've got mitigations, and if we cannot mitigate, we will be presenting pressures at that point, but it will be contained as a risk until then. We have an increase in the capital budget due to slippage, which Mohammed referred to. So that slippage from the actual report has come into this financial year, and so that's increased the budget. No major issues being identified at this point on HRA, dedicated schools grant, or the Treasury Management side of things, and collection funding is expected to be on target. And if you just move on for me, in fact, these are the risks. So the high level risks, adult social care. So we know we have continuing social care demand. The question is how much really to us. Potential shortfalls in client contributions, and I think the more we end up with price rises and implications on people's ability to pay for things, then client contributions and shortfalls could increase. So that's certainly one that we're watching. A potential gap between the cost of care exercise and grant received. So this is something that government's been working on with local government and the NHS, and so that's something we're just keeping a watchful eye on in case there is a gap there in funding. Children and families, so the CENAR world, the home to school transport world, we know we've got issues with. Birmingham Children's Trust, we know we've got continuing costs of rising costs of placements. Actually, at the moment, we're not seeing increases in placements, but very much more about criticality of placements, if you like. So certainly more costs around mental health issues and things like that. So, but not necessarily at this minute placement cost. Although again, given where we're going with the economy and what that means for people, that could change. So we're watching that. City operations, so I've mentioned parking, income shortfall, I've mentioned leisure management fees shortfall. We've also got inflationary pressures on electricity and fuel. Now we've got that recorded under city ops who are feeling that at the moment, but actually I think probably most areas are feeling the implications.
What's the length of the contract on our energy at the moment?
What, sorry?
The length of our contract.
I think we fixed some of them. I can probably bring something back on that because we did certainly fix around electricity. I don't know when that runs till, so we hedged a little bit.
Yeah.
At some point that will come out of that.
Unfortunately, it will unravel.
Yes, it will. So we're not too bad.
You mentioned parking income shortfall. There is something in the pipeline where the parks have now got paid car parking. Is that included? Has that been considered in this?
That will, subject to how well that does, that will actually improve the position if we're getting additional parking in. It will improve slightly.
A budget income target was set for parking income some 3-4 years ago. It's only now that we've now come to put those parking into that will cover that in the short that we have for a couple of years now. So these are the risks that are on pages 110 to 112 of the pack, and these are the new risks we've been over here. Early question on what are the new risks there on these.
I think Sarah's doing a fine job taking this through, so she can proceed, man.
Thank you. Okay. Potential pay award. So I've put potential pay award in here above budget of 2.5%. For every extra 1%, it would be £4 million. I know we've had an announcement, and we are just working our way through those numbers. But just to know that every 1% is 4 million extra. We have the resilience reserve to cover that should we need to fall back on that. If we cannot mitigate it in any other way, so just refer to that. And then more widely, general inflationary pressures that we are keeping a watching brief on. So all of our contracts that we are looking at and understanding the implications of. So not just our electricity contracts, but right across the board. And I do expect there is probably going to be an implication on things like social care for their contracts because they are very much wage driven, and any rises on wages will be seen in those contracts. So you can see quite a lot of knock-on effects as we going further and further into the economic issues. And then we have a risk around savings not being delivered. So we have circa 10 million of savings that are being held corporately at the moment for this year that will be distributed to directorates. So there are things in there like automation, like field workers, customer services. There are a range of corporate initiatives that we're working through, and those savings still to be distributed, but we're having good conversations with the director with those. And then we have a capitalisation target. So we are allowed to capitalise. I think this is the last year, isn't it?
The government extended it for 3 more years.
So we've got a couple more years not being able to do this, but we are allowed to capitalise transformation costs. It's a way of giving authorities a little bit of flex, if you like, over their revenue budget to charge to capital, but the only way to do that is to have capital receipts. So we are at the moment bringing capital receipts in. It's more of an issue around have we got any transformation currently in the authority to badge against those receipts. So we put it as a risk. It's one to watch. I've got my business partners working very, very closely with directorates on that. But it is a big number, so we wanted to highlight it. Just move on. So, thank you.
On your savings risk, Sarah, if I can interject for a moment. You see table 3 on page 114. You've got 29% or £12.368 million of high risk savings. So I presume those have not been identified as yet.
So they will include those corporate bonds that I talked about. So I think it's about 10 million of those are those corporate savings, which we are, as I say, working with directorates to assign. So they're at risk. That doesn't mean they're not delivered. They're just high risk, and it just means we're working very hard to deliver those. At some point, I'd like to think they're red going amber, but at the moment we're still working on them. So they're not written off.
No, I wasn't suggesting that they were written off, but I think it highlights the need. We're at the end of July now, soon to be August. It highlights the need to get the Star Chamber up and running and tying it down as quickly as possible. Of course, we'll very soon be at halfway stage.
Yes, I think we've got plans in place to get the Star Chambers operational in terms of what we talk about. So, Council Mosquitoes, Star Chambers with directors to ask them about what they're doing with savings delivery, what they're doing with their budgets. So, they will be running soon. And we also have transformation and performance Star Chambers as well. So plenty of scrutiny through those Star Chambers from that portfolio of these as well.
You said directors are involved, are the cabinet members involved?
They are, yes, they sit there. Yeah.
So you've got 2 plugs.
And then opportunities for mitigation. So we've got some staffing underspends in our corporate PMO area. So that's our Programme Management Office. CDU, Mohammed reminded me, Chief Executive Delivery Unit. Really should do acronyms. And CEDU. And then our set area. So you've forgotten as well.
Strategy, policy, partnerships.
And across the council generally. So, and in fairness, we had a lot of staff underspends last year. One of our big corporate savings was staffing. So, there are a lot of recruitment issues that we are having. So in part, it's fortuitous when we get the underspends. Not great because we need to be really motoring around services. So, but anyway, there are some potential opportunities around that. I talked about the ongoing expenditure controls and the ability to throttle those, as I call it. And then we know we've got some extra income coming in through areas such as digital mail, bringing enforcement in-house is one of our options. And we've got a policy contingency budget that we have set aside, which we can use to fund some of the electricity pressures as well. I think whilst we are asking directorates to mitigate quite a lot of overspends, I think there are some things that are very much out of their control, really. I think we need to be looking corporately for some of those things. So certainly funding the electricity pressures. And that's just in terms of the high level for that one.
Any questions or comments from members? No? So I have a question. some of the underspend in some of the departments, does that underspend have, what kind of impact does that have on the department services that they provide? So, you know, if we, let's just say, have an underspend of social services of 20 million, does that mean that the 20 million savings that we've made, hypothetically, has that impacted any of the services that we provide to the citizen?
I think it'll be different in different areas. As a hypothetical, I think as they come out new, I mean, there's always the opportunity to either have officers here from those directorates, if you want to, or maybe ask the chairs of those other scrutinies to maybe ask the directors about those. But as a general rule, it could impact, you know, if subject to what we haven't or have done. So if an underspend was because we haven't transformed something and you know, haven't done necessarily anything we said, it could be an impact on services. Equally, it might be fruition that we just have to have some underspend. So I think it's a hard one to say. I guess I've got an exact example.
It depends on the nature of the
It
service.
totally doesn't it?
If it's a demand-led service, then underspend might not be nothing. It means there's less demand for that service. Where we are providing a service, underspend could reflect that we're not providing the service we should be providing. So that's where we need to get on the skill of each individual one, or cabinet report, or three scrutiny would do. It's not the nature, because not every underspend is a good thing.
No. What we've been very keen to do is be hugely transparent on what services are doing. So if there is an underspend anywhere, we are very quick to make sure we flush that out and we explain that. And if there is any counter spending that happens on the back of that, we're equally very clear to lay that out. Yeah, so it's a hard one to answer.
Thank you for that. Would it be appropriate if we could have directors to come, is that in our remit, this committee, to have them come in and detail the underspending and impact is being made to the citizens?
Yeah.
Or overspend.
Yeah.
Or underspend.
Can I just ask about the underspend in terms of rubbish? Because a lot of residents are saying in the past they didn't have these issues with rubbish, and lighting in particular has really escalated over a number of years. So is there a relationship between underspend and that service?
Do we have where it outlined? I can't remember off the top of my head whether it was whether we quite got that level of detail. If we haven't got it in the report, we can certainly let
It is somewhere.
no, that's just there is a reference in which way, so I don't know if it's writing to what directly as a correlation, but we can certainly bring that back if it's not there.
Yeah, can I just bring Fiona involved?
I'm just thinking, because the reach of this committee is so broad across the finance and rules across the whole council. I was wondering whether one way to pick up the point that's been made about relationship between underspend and overspend and performance is, it may well be in the report, but if there could be a summary of the underspend and overspends in the directorates, that could be shared with the chairs of the different committees. And then the different committees that look at those services could then maybe explore that a bit more with the relevant heads of service or directorates, rather than it all coming to this committee. And then that could inform the budget scrutiny later in the year.
And we
That's what it's
certainly did that in previous years.
Yeah,
So I think the chair of this committee wrote to chairs of the other scrutinies with either particular issues that we had seen here, and you know, to suggest that they might want to be explored. So that's certainly how we've done it before. And yes, there is a table in the outer report, so we can of course share that with yourself and those other chairs as well, if they want to explore the correlation with underspending, overspending, and performance. Absolutely.
I think the slight complication might be is that the scrutiny committees don't necessarily sit neatly with the cabinet portfolios. So I can pick that up with you outside, we can find out a better way to present that information.
Yes. Thank you.
Can we invite the director from waste to actually break things down for us, so that we can actually look at what's gone on financially and performance-wise? Because it's a big issue, I think it's a huge issue, and it's across so many wards. that we really do need to look into.
Do we do joint scrutiny? Because I was just going to say, we could either do it, yes, they can come here, absolutely. If you want to understand performance with it, which is possible.
I think the performance comes to the housing neighbourhood committee, but it may be that if this cross-referencing work picks this up as an issue, that then members of this committee would go to the resourcing committee if they're looking at performance to answer the finance question, or vice versa, depending on where if the emphasis is on finance, I think it's here. If the emphasis is on the impact on performance, it's probably with the other committee, and members can be invited. So we are building up the joint working between the committees through the inquiries that we're doing, but this isn't a topic of inquiry, but there are ways that committees can join up on things rather than duplicating.
Yeah. So I think we're saying yes to you.
Yes. It might be this committee or the other way, depending on
That's fine.
where the chairs would feel it's best sits.
As long as we can hear from them. Yeah, that's
Yeah, I think it would be a good idea, Councillor B, with a suggestion that we could have a person, and I know what Fiona said, that it could cross over to the other committees, but I think what Councillor is suggesting is our committee can have them attend, and then we can, and give us the financial breakdown, and I think it's a very pertinent and important point, Councillor B makes, because obviously it is one of the issues that we pick up all the time whilst we're out in the community. So yes, I think, you know, if that can be noted and
is the financial pressure or the financial performance impacting, what's the impact of the performance, and then that performance then pass on to the other community. We realise that.
Yeah.
So there might be the budget targets.
yeah.
There's also a rolling programme on the audit committee of cabinet members and directors reporting regularly during the
That's that's an assurance.
It's an assurance of governance.
There, the emphasis is on making sure that the governance process within the department, the decision-making processes, and financial controls and management controls are in place to allow them to perform. So we don't look at what they perform, how they perform. We look at have they got the right setup to enable them to perform right.
I don't think it was a triangulation. Using each of those committees, don't they? Yeah. With their different ranges.
well, certainly they get a hard time as always.
Yeah.
That's from all members. It's not just opposition members. Of course, we're all subject to complaints over council services. As you said, you get pressure on fly tipping. We all get complaints from residents. So a variety of issues of council provision or non-provision or lack of activity. So.
I think another thing, the reason why I'm asking is because perhaps we need to put in more resources in two ways. Because not only then do we have flighting, and then we've got the VATs and more public health, and I just think in the long term, it's probably costing us more not to rectify these things. So perhaps we need to put more resources into them. That's something that we would like to.
Would you like a membership card now? I mean, that really is a debate that you need to have within your group, because that is largely where the allocation of the budget takes place. We are fairly well down the feeding chain as far as pressure is concerned, but we can highlight specific issues, and hopefully the cabinet and leadership of the council will take notice of what we and the audit committee and the other scrutiny committees are saying about the council services. And but it is essentially a relocation of funds between different spending departments. Your high level budget is just over £1 billion. A third of it goes on children and families, and a third of it goes on adult social care. So, if we're going to put more money into one thing or another, it's got to come from somewhere, unless it's coming from those wonderful efficiencies that we keep on talking about.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Sarah. item 9, which is the planned procurement activities report. In line with the procurement governance arrangements in the Constitution, the report was circulated to members by email last week to give them the opportunity to raise any issues where they were of the view that any individual procurements needed to be referred to Cabinet for executive decision. No issues were raised, and therefore the report is on the agenda for today's meeting for noting. And Steve Sandercock, I think, is
It's just on.
and if I can bring Steve in to give us a report and answer any questions from the members. Steve?
Hello, hi, thank you, Chair. Chair, just to update on that, the report did go to Cabinet on Tuesday. The paper in regards to the PSL arrangements, I think members at Cabinet have asked for, and it was approved, a separate report, an individual report for that paper will now be brought back to Cabinet as a particular update. So I think that's really the main point. That was around the DPS, so the dynamic purchases system for the provision of temporary accommodation. That one is, if you like, has been asked to be pulled forward for a separate and individual report. All the other items on the PPAR paper went through and were noted. What I would say, Chair, is that as from September, what we are looking to do to ensure that the planned procurement activity process is in line with constitutional aspects around key decisions. What we will be doing as from September Cabinet, we will then be producing 2 reports. One will be for non-key decisions, which will effectively form the line which currently happens around the PPAR for Cabinet to note the planned activity and also where appropriate to delegate award approvals. The second report will be for all key decision activity. So that will be for reports which are, for example, I think it's over 500,000 threshold in line with the Constitution, or if it's a procurement which impacts 2 or more wards, etc. Those ones will now be incorporated onto the forward plan. So those ones will have 28 days notice on the forward plan before then being raised at Cabinet. So that's just like I said, a governance change. It falls in line with the update of the procurement and contract governance rules, and also in line with our wider constitution. So I just wanted to make members aware of that position. It should hopefully aid transparency in the future as well.
Thank you for that, Steve. Any questions or comments?
We had a debate about the procurement process at the last council meetings.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think, Steve, there's no questions.
Thank you.
There is a provision on the agenda to go into a private session, but this will only be necessary if members indicate there are any questions on the exempt appendix 3. If this is the case, the item on the public agenda then will be concluded before concluding the public, ending the live streaming and moving into private sessions. Is there any questions on that? No? Okay, so to confirm the planned procurement activities report is a standing item and all resources are including agenda, and therefore this is the process which will be followed for future meetings. So I think we're in agreement on that. Moving on to item 10, the work programme. And this is just to discuss the work programme, to give members the opportunity to suggest any other items for future meetings. Fiona, can you provide an update on the current position with scheduling items?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Chair. So the work programme is a standing item on the agenda for the meeting, so it can be constantly reviewed and updated. It's attached as a final appendix in the pack. The appendix 1 is the table right at the end of the documents. But I think probably to highlight a couple of issues that were raised at the last meeting. We discussed at the coordinating committee meeting, and it was decided they do sit within the remit of this committee. So, as mentioned earlier, the budget scrutiny, so scrutiny of the council's budget proposals as part of the budget setting process, will happen through this committee the January meeting. And I think that picks up on some of the discussions around performance management and financial impacts. Any work the committee does on that before January, I think will be quite helpful in that process, because it might clarify your thoughts about the budget proposals. And then the other issue, again, just mentioned at the last meeting, was the scrutiny inquiry on council assets that had been led by the Housing and Neighbourhoods Committee. Because council assets actually sits within the remit of this committee, this committee will monitor the implementation of those recommendations, and I think that's been built in for it's not in this draft of the work programme to be circulated, but we're looking to include that in October to give enough time for the recommendations to work through and there to be progress to report back to the committee. Then the other thing I'll update, it doesn't directly affect the work programme for this committee, but it was mentioned at the last meeting, was the inquiries that are happening across scrutiny. So the 6 proposals that were put forward, there are 4 inquiries that are going to take place. One will focus on children and people's mental health, another on child exploitation, skills in the economy, and then the health and wellbeing legacy of the Commonwealth Games. So they're not directly pieces of work that this committee will lead or be involved in, but I think it's just worth updating members that you have that information. And then finally, in terms of cabinet member attendance at the meeting, the cabinet member for finance has confirmed that she's able to attend the meeting, part of the meeting in September. And I think that's it's quite well on the agenda that's already been proposed, the agenda that's been proposed, because there is the progress report on the procurement governance arrangements that was discussed at council. That's my updates on the work programme, but see if there's any further suggestions that people may want to make. We can.
Thank you for that, Kiana. Can I put that to the members? Any questions or comments on the work programme?
So the 4 that is that been agreed and decided what we're going to?
The inquiries? Yes. So that was each of the committees put forward, or one has to put forward proposals. This committee, I think, was focusing on the committee work programme rather than inquiries that you want to do. So there wasn't an inquiry put forward by this committee. The 6 proposals went forward to be considered at a coordinating committee, and that's where the 4 inquiries were selected. And I believe that was reported when it was reported to council. So that's been noted by council, and we will be sending out information to all members again. So we're looking at the scope of the inquiry, so members are kept up to date with that.
What were the other 2 that weren't chosen?
So there was one on dementia, particularly the impact of dementia on women, but that's actually been picked up through the work programme for the Health and Social Care Committee. It's an agenda item, and the other inquiry was looking at void properties, but I think that's been picked up through the work programme for the Housing and Neighbourhoods Committee. So that they haven't been dropped completely, they're just got to be the focus of a larger piece of work.
I think one of the problems with respect to everybody is the enormous changeover that there's been on this committee. That threads that were kicking around last year haven't been picked up in the process this year and put into the system. But I did say at the last council, I thought that every scrutiny committee should have at least one. The only mitigation in the process would be that we did have a slightly elongated scrutiny last year about the whole procurement process. So I think we might be entitled to take it easy this year. Is that right?
Thank you, Councillor Tilson. Are we formally agreeing the withdrawn programme? Is that agreed?
Chair, yes, just one proposal from me, possibly for the next meeting is, I recall, I know we thought the Oracle system implementation moving forward and talked to this group about how that's going, so I think it's quite an actually in terms of just implementing, I think that would close that.
We can have that. Moving on to item 11, date of meeting 2022 and 2023. I propose that meetings be held at 1400 hours on the following Thursdays. 28th of July, which is today, 8th of September is the next one, 6th of October, 17th of November, 22nd of December, 19th of January next year, 2nd of March, 30th of March, and 27th of April. And we are reminded to approve Thursday's meetings at 2 o'clock or a suitable day and time each week. For any additional meetings required, to consider requests for calling which may be lodged in respect of executive decisions. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Item 12, request for calling councillor or call for action petitions received in training. Is there any calling or written petitions? No?
Not received, Chair.
No. Okay. I think we're moving quite fast to the next item 13. Any other urgent business? We need to consider any items of business by reason of special circumstances to be specified that in the opinion of the chair of matters of urgency. I can't record anything at the moment. Anything from the members?
Can I just ask you a petition you mentioned?
Yeah.
Would that be a petition from residents who bring it to this meeting? Or to full council?
I think there are different thresholds to a petition. I can't remember the number of signatories, but if it has a certain number of signatures, then it will come to scrutiny. If it has more signatures, it will go to full council. It would have to fall within the remit of the.
To present a petition to City Council, you need 10 signatures, that's all. For the council to then have a scrutiny following a petition from memory, and this from memory, I think you need 500 signatures to that order, and then there has to be a scrutiny report on it.
Can we get clarification on that?
Yeah.
Certainly, yeah.
Right, for the petition.
If you want one, I might start fighting.
Any other urgent business? No, item 14, authority to chair and officers in an urgent situation between meetings.
Agree.
Thank you, Councillor Tilsley. Exclusion of the public.
No.
Plan procurement activities.
We don't do that item for the
private agenda.
There are questions on appendix 3.
Before we close the meeting, any comments or any questions about before we close the meeting?
Thank you for agreeing with the directive always, because that really is important.
I will raise that with the chair of the committee.
Yeah.
Come back.
Okay. I'd like to thank Councillor Tilsley, Councillor B, Councillor Mahmood, thank you for your time. Mohammed, Sarah, Fiona, Steve, and I'm not good with the
So this Rebecca.
Rebecca.
Jane, sorry, Gail has been noted in the meeting today.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Gail. And I think we will all meet at the next meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
I'll just confirm now that recording will start.